Hello, this is Justin from TrackBikes.com reviewing the Armour Bodies Supersport bodywork for an SV1000S. My Supersport set of Armour Bodies distributed by Woodcraft was actually ordered from a California-based motorcycle site for $699. The buying process for this bodywork was a saga of miscommunication and errors by itself. Because the fairings were listed as SV650 race fairings, before I bought them, I contacted the supplier to ask if this bodywork would fit an SV1000. From the factory, the bodywork on the SV650 and the Big Brother SV1000 is interchangeable. But I didn't know if there was some small detail or nuance in the bodywork that I was overlooking, so I asked about the fitment. I was told by the supplier that they contacted Woodcraft and informed me that it would fit. Whether the supplier actually contacted Woodcraft or not is another story, but they told me it would fit. Turns out it doesn't fit, without modification to the belly fairing. The left side belly fairing mount doesn't have a location to bolt to on the SV1000, but that's a smaller issue. The larger concern is that the SV650 has a smaller exhaust diameter, so there's not enough clearance between the fairings and the exhaust tube. The supplier informed me of the exhaust fitment issue and offered not to order the bodywork, but I was already committed at that point. One of my options was to cut a hole where the exhaust touches it and just leave it. This may have been an okay solution, but the point of the belly pan is as a fluid container should something catastrophic happen with the engine. Another option was to cut a hole and then refiberglass my own bubble to accommodate the exhaust and keep the belly pan. I've never fiberglassed before, and after paying $700 for this bodywork, I didn't want the additional cost and work to do that. The last option was to just let it burn. After getting some assurance that it wouldn't catch fire, this seemed to be the best option since it would allow me to know exactly where I would need to cut if I wanted to exercise one of the options later. The supplier also provided some thermal foil to put inside the fairing to try to help with the heat as much as possible, but because the exhaust is physically touching the fairing, it really didn't help much. Even idling in my driveway, the infrared gun measuring temperature still read over 400 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside of my fiberglass. On to the installation. Really the only tool required was a step drill bit. I used a 1/4 to 3/4 bit. The standoffs on the molds of the Armour Bodies lined up really well, and I only needed to go through the first 1/4 inch step, or occasionally the second step of 5/16 if I needed a little more wiggle room. Take your time to mock this up. It really helps to have two people so someone can hold the fairings in place while another measures and marks the spots for drilling. Assuming all the street parts are already off the bike, the whole install, by myself, took around an hour. For the SV kit, the biggest pain was installing the tail section as it's very tight, but I think this may have to do with the previous owner's installation of an undertail kit that wasn't done properly. If you're willing to be patient with it, you should be able to eventually slide it down over the rear subframe and tuck the black plastic undertail up inside it. You may have to manhandle the plastic a little bit by folding it up. Again, it helps to have two people, so it'll tuck up inside the tail. You have the option of taking a Dremel and carving out the tail a little more, but I don't think it's necessary if you muscle the undertail plastic up. There are spots to drill and put Zeus fasteners, but I decided the fitment was so tight that it wasn't going to be an issue. The tail section is only held from the bolts near the battery box under the seat. The second hardest part of the install was the Zeus fasteners on the fairing. Once you mount the upper fairing, the lower fairing really only attaches to the upper, but there's a limited amount of flat space to put the Zeus clips on. It's important to drill the holes properly so it'll mount right. There's enough space for 3 Zeus clips, but I opted for 2 because the third looked like it would be overkill and I didn't want to Swiss cheese the small area near the edge of the fairing either. I started by drilling the locations where I wanted the upper fairing that I installed. Here's where it helps to have 2 people. I put some masking tape on the inside lip of the lower fairing so I could take a pen or Sharpie and mark where the through holes were drilled from the inside of the fairing. It helps to have another person hold the lower fairing in the right location so you can stick your pen up inside and mark the through holes. Other items of note. If you're using OE factory brake lines, you'll have to mark and drill the holes to mount the front brake lines into the front fender. Also, if you have frame sliders, depending on where they're mounted on your bike, you're likely going to have to use a hole saw to cut the upper fairing, or remove them, make a smaller hole, and reinstall. I chose to cut a larger hole. The trick I used was to put rows of masking tape on the inside of the upper fairing near the area where I knew I'd have to cut, and then use washable or water-based ink pad and press some ink onto the edge of the frame slider. When you install the fairing, the ink will be on the tape and give you a good starting point on where to cut. It won't be the exact location since the fairing's bowed out when you put it over the frame sliders, but it gives you a generally close location to make a pilot hole for the hole saw. I used this trick where the exhaust was going to hit the lower fairing as well. I dipped the front pipe with some ink, put some masking tape on the inside of the belly fairing in the general area I thought it would contact, installed and removed the fairing, and had a nice dark mark to show exactly where the fairing was hitting. Overall, the fairing kit was packaged nice when it arrived with plenty of packing material. The fairings feel sturdy and the primer coat was done well. The kit was generally easy to install too, but like anything of this nature, it's better to take some extra time and measure twice and cut or drill once. The biggest disappointment was that the fairings for the SV650 don't fit the SV1000 perfectly. The price for these kits also is on the more expensive side, nearly double what you can get from other brands. I've read the reviews on the other bodywork, Hot Body, Shark Skins, and the only other brand I considered was Optimal Race Fairings because they seemed like a good value. My only experience is with Armour Bodies, so I can't really comment on the other stuff. I also can't comment on the crashability of the Armour Bodies, but from what I've read on various forums and product review sites, the Armour Bodies holds up well in accidents. I honestly hope to never find out. This was Justin from TrackBikes.com reviewing the Armour Bodies Supersport Race Fairing Set. Please check out my other reviews and track day videos and leave any questions or comments below.